In this video, I'm going to break down how the wealthy use debt as a tool to be extremely rich and how you can start to do the exact same thing. The ultimate wealth strategy of the filthy rich is to buy, borrow, die. Let me explain. Now, a strategy is literally just a blueprint of good decision making. So this is not rocket science, but I assure you, you can do this. All people need income. The question is, if you are poor and middle class, that's earned income or money from transactions that you are doing. The rich and the very wealthy use borrowed cash. So rule number one is buy. So what you want to do is you want to buy assets like real estate or businesses. You can even start a business or a life insurance policy with a cash value. But what you're doing is you are buying assets that are appreciating. Because guess why? You don't pay tax on appreciated assets. That's rule number one. You buy. If you don't have the money to buy, don't worry. Either did I. Because you do not need money to buy cash flowing assets. In short, cash flow of the asset is the income. This services the debt that the bank or lender will borrow on. Get great at finding the deal. Then find people to lend the money to secure the down payment of the deal. Do this in the beginning until you have enough to go on your own or continue doing it on a larger scale. It might surprise you that most wealthy people don't take any money out of their companies because, of course, they get taxed on it. In fact, there's 8.5 trillion, yes, trillion of untaxed income that's not taxed for people that they call the $1 salary club. So just go Google this and you will see who's on that list. People that you know, like Elon Musk. They're in the $1 salary club. They take all of their money from borrowed cash. Rule number two is you borrow against your holdings, or you are borrowing against a business or real estate or even a life insurance policy with cash value. So you buy first, then you borrow the money out of that asset. The cool part about this is that the money you borrow is tax-free because it's debt. It's not actually a sale. When you sell, you owe tax. When you do not sell, you do not owe tax. It's that simple. So what you do is you buy and then you borrow against appreciating assets that you've already bought. If you take $1 million salary out of a business, you're going to pay somewhere in the mid 30% in tax. If you borrow that $1 million out of that same business, you are going to pay zero tax. The reason is because it's not a sale and it's not earned income. You actually don't get taxed on debt because you owe it back. So with rule number one, you buy something, you need to make sure that people will lend against it, like real estate, some kind of collateral. You want to make sure that somebody will lend against it. You can draw some cash out of that asset as long as you do not sell. There will be no tax. So the wealthy use loans or borrow cash to pay for their lifestyles, and they take very little income out of the business in the form of earned income because that's taxed. Step three, we all die unfortunately. It is a fact of life. We cannot escape this. So how do you transfer all those things onto your heirs, tax-free? There are three ways. The first way is what we call a step up in basis. So when I pass away, eventually, let's say my house is worth 1 million and then appreciating the 2 million, it would pass to my heirs. Let's say I have 2 kids for 2 million and they would not owe tax. That's called a step up in basis because I died. What that means is that $1 million that I got through appreciation transfers to them tax free. They literally own zero on my home. If they sell it on day one and they get 2 million, they owe zero tax. If they keep it for 10 more years and it goes to 3 million, then of course they owe tax on the 1 million gain from 2 million to 3 million. But that's how step up in basis works. So you can transfer your assets to heirs to what's called a step up in basis. The second one, of course, is a 1031 exchange. I will do a video on this in the future. I've done 5 of these in the past actually, and in short, a 1031 exchange is where you can buy, borrow, and then sell, but then you defer capital gains onto another deal. And it just keeps what real estate investors call kicking the can down the road. You pay zero taxes. Then of course, I can transfer those into a trust, which I've already done. And there's lots of different kinds of trusts. There's revocable trusts and irrevocable trusts, and I'm not going to get into all these nuances of what they are in this video. But I can assure you, if you transfer your assets into a trust, then the appreciation grows tax-free inside of that trust as well for your heirs. So again, when you die, those assets have already appreciated inside of those trusts. Those heirs, of course, don't have the tax. It's important to understand that you can do this with real estate, you can do this with stocks, you can do this with businesses, you can do this with any kind of assets. I would definitely make sure that you engage a CPA to make sure this is set up correctly. So most people pay more tax as they accumulate more wealth over the period of time. The smart ones or the wealthy ones pay less tax over time because they use these tax strategies that are perfectly legal. As their wealth skyrockets, they actually pay less tax. So a lot of you might be in the same exact circumstance that I was when I first started, which was a W-2 income, and I hardly had any savings. What I focused on is I found cash flowing assets like real estate that I self-taught myself to do by studying rich people on how they got so rich. These assets that appreciated over time that people would lend against, once I found and got better and better at analyzing and acquiring these deals, then I eventually had plenty of money to invest in my own deals, from stacking the cash flow to strategically borrowing against them to purchase more income producing assets. So that's how you start. You start with finding that cash flowing deal that appreciates over time that people can lend against. It doesn't necessarily matter what that appreciating asset is, as long as it grows over time and you can borrow against it. So let me tell you how my company works. We have hundreds of millions in debt leveraged against multifamily real estate. My goal is to be $1 billion in debt. Sounds crazy, but listen. What a lot of people don't think about is how much equity we have now. We can't get to the equity, of course, until we borrow out of that, which we do from time to time when rates are in a good spot. But in the meantime, I have 1,000 or so tenants paying off that debt. That's a really important thing. So not only do I have debt, but I have covered debt. In other words, like a credit card would be me. I would be my paycheck paying back a credit card. In this particular case, it's borrowed against a property where a lot of people live and they pay every single month rent. And then I take that rent and pay down the mortgages. So that's how that works. So I'm hedging inflation through fixed rate debt. And I have cash flow every single month. When rates are in a good spot, Then I can go harvest more money and borrow more cash to be able to use for whatever I want. I can go buy more real estate if I'd like to expand my portfolio. I can go buy a house, a jet, cars, whatever I want. But here's the greatest part. It's tax free because I'm harvesting the cash out of an asset that I already have. So I'll tell you a story about a scenario in my life. So my friend's mom fell, unfortunately, during the pandemic, and all the kids were freaking out, of course. She broke her hip and she needed 24/7 care. That's a massive injury, especially for an elderly person. So we had to put her, or they had to put her in some kind of care that can watch her for 24 hours a day. In the meantime, her house was vacant and the family got together and they said we should sell her house to pay for the care. Very common scenario. Their mom bought the house for 10 grand a very long time ago, and it's worth somewhere between 7 and 800,000 now. If they would have sold it at that time because she's still alive, they would have had to pay tax on, let's say, a $700,000 to $800,000 gain. That would have been a sizable tax check. Let's say a couple $100,000 at least. That would have netted them a lot less. And of course, they would have used that to take care of her care. The better idea that I explained to them is to wait. And sorry for the mom, but the reality is she's going to pass away at some point. Just like I am, just like you are. At that point, they will get a step up in basis. Now, if the home is, say, worth $800,000, it transfers to the heirs or the kids for exactly that amount. If they sell it right then there's zero tax. So even though she bought it for 10 grand and when she passes, let's say it's 800K, then that actually transfers to the heirs for zero tax if they sold it in year one right away. That's how step up in basis works. If you sell something, you owe tax. If you don't owe tax. In this particular case, they are just using the tax law to their advantage to save over $200,000 in taxes by letting her pass first. So what I explained to them to do and what they decided to do was put a tenant in there that actually ended up paying for their mom's monthly. And that covered her completely. She was happy. The mom didn't have to sell the house. The tenant is paying for her monthly expenses, and if she wants to, she can move back into the house at some other time once she heals completely. So that was a win-win for everyone. Instead of trying to sell the house to pay for her care and taking a massive loss through taxes, they opted for the tenant in there, maintain that cash flow, and not have over a $200,000 taxable event on her house. So that's how the wealthy use the tax laws to their advantage, because in a lot of scenarios, people would sell that house. And at that point, because they want the money and they pay a huge tax bill, as a result, don't do that. Get financially smarter. You can start by subscribing to the channel, hitting the thumbs up, and until next time.